All of us took stewardship of our companies in the last 2 decades when the robust economic growth created an era of optimism and confidence in the country and about India in the world. We gather today in the midst of an extremely turbulent time for the Indian economy. Beyond shrinking GDP growth and falling currency, what is truly remarkable is that the spirit of optimism seems to have been replaced by one of apprehension and despondency. It is therefore only appropriate that this industry forum has as its theme chosen renewal and innovation. In my mind, the forces that unleash our exciting growth story are the very same as those that can inspire innovation and renewal in our industry. And at its heart is our willingness to be resolutely open to the world, to new capital, and to new talent. But no renewal can happen either in our economy or in our industry if we are not brazenly open to new ideas. It is in this context that I had made a point a few months ago that there is no media industry without free expression. If anything, the events of last few months have proven to us that there can be no Indian growth story without free expression, because free expression and free enterprise go together. Our ability to improve the lives of millions of Indians is firmly tied to our ability to unshackle businesses in allowing them the space and the imagination to create new products and new ideas and new services. In many ways, as we all know, the dramatic economic reforms of 1991 were accidental. They did not emerge from a strong national consensus that we needed to change the direction of our post-independence path. It came from a shock polity that opened the country for business only when there was no other conceivable option left. And yet, that accidental moment created the space for a new generation of Indian entrepreneurs whose enterprise and initiative not only created wealth, but resulted in millions and millions of jobs. It also helped India achieve a near double-digit annual growth, triggering a social transformation, the pace of which, if sustained, was capable of lifting India out of poverty in just one generation. Today, there is a vociferous debate in play on whether India can afford a $22 billion food program. What is truly remarkable is that it is actually evidence of how much distance we have moved in the last 2 decades. 2 decades ago, even the topic would not have come under discussion because India could just not afford it, a $22 billion welfare program, no matter how noble the cause might have been. Of course, business cycles can ebb and flow, but what stalled India's growth and employment creation was our remarkable ability as a country to create a web of processes, regulations, and norms that make it extremely difficult for entrepreneurs to conduct business. And in a hyper-competitive global economy where countries actively nurture promising sectors and constantly renew themselves to attract new investments, we really run the risk of being left behind. While skepticism about reforms could have been justified 20 years ago, what is surprising is that we are still debating the value of reforms and unshackling businesses when our own recent history is the most compelling testimonial to the power of entrepreneurship. Every time we have made it a bit easier for people to conduct business, we have generated enormous dividends through growth and employment. Every time we have made it easier for investors to bring in capital, we have created new markets and services. Nowhere is this more prevalent than in the media and entertainment industry. 20 years ago, the real face of liberalization for most Indians was the appearance of dish antennas on roofs. It was a compelling signal to the world outside that India was open for business. We were ready to embrace new ideas wherever they originated. We were confident enough in our new identity to be open to new worlds. And in that period, the industry saw a remarkable transformation in its size and in its scale. From one state-run broadcaster with limited reach and less than 5 hours of daily content, we now have over 800 channels telecasting more than 500,000 hours of original content to 700 million viewers. From around 3,000 newspapers in 1991, we've grown to more than 80,000 newspapers today, with most of the growth coming in vernacular languages. Our movie industry has grown 20 times in 20 years. The industry has evolved from a disorganized community dominated by a few players to a highly competitive sector that is increasingly better organized and better run. From just about $750 million in 1991, it's now an industry worth $15 billion. It supports 6 million jobs directly and probably twice more indirectly. It has both facilitated and absorbed new technologies, and it has created a compelling platform to showcase India to the world. So much so that last year, at this very stage, we set ourselves an ambitious target of $100 billion for the sector. And yet, this spectacular success in serving the Indian consumer and in creating employment has not been met with more reforms and more openness. Surprisingly and frighteningly, we seem to have regressed in many ways. We've created a web of policies and regulations which, while they may have had the honorable intent of protecting the consumer, have had exactly the opposite effect. Today, I would like to call out two big challenges, the combination of which have had stifling impacts on innovation in our industry. One, our television viewers today have access to global content, whether through online portals, through network broadcasters who are airing global shows closer and closer to the global launch dates, or simply through piracy. This has brought about a burning need for innovative, original content in India. However, for an industry that boasts of almost 500,000 hours of original programming every year, how much of it is actually innovative content that we are proud of having brought onto the screens in this country? The reason is very simple. Our ability to charge for content has nothing to do with the scale of our investments in it. If a bold producer does decide to take risk capital on cutting edge, new idea, today he or she has no liberty to price the creative work. Why then should the person take a risk when he stands no chance of getting a decent return on his investment, even if the production becomes a blockbuster success? The result is, as we all know, tired, stagnant, insipid content for the consumer, no policy, dramatic improvement, not just in the economics of the film business, but also in the quality and diversity of movies that came to the market. Without raising costs substantially for the price-conscious consumer, it has financed the generation of content that has appealed to both niche and mass audiences. It is difficult today to avoid the persistent debate about the quality and health of news channels. But there is no question at all that it is the restrictive tariff regime that has prevented news broadcasters from producing high-quality content for an audience that is much smaller than available for general entertainment or sports. Ironically, a regime that was brought to protect the consumer has ended up doing the most damage to consumer choice and quality. Even more frightening than price control to my mind is the creeping controls on free speech. For a country that prides itself on its deep democratic ethos, the last decade has been characterized by a creeping inclination to impose controls on speech and free expression. It may have started with the opposition to just a few books here and there, but controls on expression seem to mark new grounds every year. Small filmmakers who decide to invest in offbeat movies are plagued by having to defend their movies in litigation because a small minority somewhere is offended by it. Films cleared by the censor board do not give you the comfort that they will be screened because a state government and often non-state actors can just hit the streets and under the threat of violence the film could be withdrawn. TV shows attempting to break through the clutter find their characters' voices beeped out. Even the titling of a movie as dirty picture seems to be an open invitation to trouble. The result is work that is so mundane that sparks no questions, elicits no debate, and pushes no creative boundaries. This month, in fact next week, we at Star will launch Mahabharat on our flagship channel Star Plus. It is a show that we have made with a lot of passion and on a scale and grandeur that has never been seen before on Indian television. And yet, a few days before the launch, what worries me the most is not the quality of the series or whether it will succeed. What keeps me awake at nights is that some lunatic fringe somewhere in the country would raise some absurd objection to the show and we'll be forced to be on the defensive. It is no surprise then that the tyranny of the minority has now reached the Central Hall and other halls of Parliament. Today, a small but vocal group can claim both the moral high ground and have the political legitimacy to hold to ransom India's legislature for a day, for a session, and for several sessions. This should not come as a shock at all, for behind this practice is the very same culture that we have nurtured and indulged for too long. The culture that grants legitimacy, cover, and sometimes even state protection to the very few who are offended or are bothered by the expression of another group, and who can take to the streets and can vandalize private and public property with impudence. It should not be surprising then that when we start putting limits on new ideas and free expression in our cultural space, they slowly creep their way into our political and economic spaces too. And the result is what we are seeing today. The collective impact of regulation and the creeping tyranny of the minority and the crazy have stifled innovation in our industry, and dare I say, now in the economy as a whole. At 15%, we may grow at thrice the rate of the GDP, but that is more a reflection of our top-line economic growth than the health of our industry. At this rate, it will take us another 15 years to hit the $100 billion goal in value terms, and by then, we'll still be under 3% of the world media market. That, I presume, is not acceptable to this group. Make no mistake, I definitely am not arguing for a world without regulation. History has taught us that free enterprise is well served by clear rules and policies. Absence of regulation is as bad as over-regulation. But what is desperately needed is a consensus on what to regulate and how much to regulate and when to regulate. What we also need to understand clearly, who has the authority to regulate? Can anybody hit the streets and start regulating? And it is this lack of consistency in regulation that is impacting multiple industries. At exactly the moment when our economy is poised for the next big leap, we have found a way to make it harder and harder for our companies to innovate, to create new products and services, and to find new markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that over the next 2 days, as we explore new ways to grow our sector, the resounding message from this summit is that as a sector and as a country, we will remain stubbornly open to new ideas and committed to expanding the spaces of free expression.